He spoke 6 languages. He guided the men who founded Canada. He was kidnapped by the Dutch, contracted by the French, and imprisoned in a fortress. And then he vanished from history completely. This is the story of Mathieu Da Costa, the first recorded black man to set foot in what is now Canada. A free African who walked with Samuel de Champlain, a man whose linguistic genius made European colonization of North America possible, and whose name was erased for 4 centuries. According to records preserved in the Dutch National Archives and French colonial documents, Mathieu Da Costa was what historians now call an Atlantic Creole, a term coined by historian Ira Berlin to describe people of African descent who, through birth, experience, or choice, became part of a new culture emerging along the Atlantic coastline during the Age of Exploration. These were extraordinary individuals. They spoke multiple languages. They navigated between worlds. They served as the human bridges that made the entire Atlantic trading system function. And Mathieu Da Costa may have been one of the most remarkable of them all. Here is what the historical records tell us. Sometime around 1589, a man named Mathieu Da Costa entered documented history. His origins remain debated. According to the Canadian Encyclopedia's analysis of surviving records, some historians believe his family came from the Kingdom of Benin in West Africa, in what is now Nigeria. Others suggest he may have been born in the Azore Islands, near Portugal and Morocco, where mixed-race African Portuguese communities had thrived for generations. What is certain is this: Da Costa possessed an almost supernatural gift for languages. According to Wikipedia's documentation of surviving contracts and colonial records, his linguistic portfolio included Dutch, English, French, Portuguese, and most remarkably, Mikmaq, the language of the Indigenous peoples of Atlantic Canada. He also spoke Pidgin Basque, a trading language that fishermen and Indigenous peoples had developed over decades of contact along the North Atlantic coast. Let that sink in. A man of African descent in the early 1600s could communicate fluently with European colonizers and with the First Nations peoples they were trying to trade with. He could move between worlds that had almost nothing in common, serving as the crucial link that made understanding possible. This made him invaluable and dangerous. Between 1604 and 1607, according to BlackPast.org's historical documentation, Da Costa worked with the Acadians, French settlers in early Nova Scotia, when they began commerce with the Mikmaq along the Atlantic coast. He was present during one of the most important moments in Canadian history. In 1604, a French expedition led by Pierre Duguay de Mons set sail for the New World. According to the U.S. National Park Service's historical records, this expedition included Samuel de Champlain, the man who would become known as the Father of New France. The Ontario Heritage Trust confirms that Mathieu Da Costa, a translator of African descent, joined this expedition and is believed to be the first black person to arrive in Canada. Think about the significance of that statement. Before Jamestown, before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock, a free black man was helping to establish European presence in North America, not as a slave, but as a valued professional whose skills were essential to the mission's success. The expedition's first winter was catastrophic. According to Parks Canada's historical documentation, they settled on St. Croix Island, a choice that proved nearly fatal. The winter of 1604 to 1605 was one of the coldest on record. Ice floes prevented the men from reaching the mainland. 35 of 79 settlers died, many from scurvy. The survivors, including likely Da Costa, relocated to Port Royal in what is now Nova Scotia. And this is where Da Costa's story becomes a mystery wrapped in contradictions. Here's what we know from the records, according to the Canadian Encyclopedia. Conflicting stories exist about where Da Costa was at different times. Some accounts say he died of scurvy during the winter of 1607 in Port Royal, along with 3 other men. But Dutch records show him very much alive in Amsterdam in February 1607. How is that possible? According to documents preserved in the Gemeentearchief Amsterdam, the Amsterdam City Archives, Da Costa was kidnapped from the French by Dutch traders who brought him to Amsterdam. Read that again. He was kidnapped. The Dutch had seized 2 of Pierre Duguay de Mons's ships near Tadoussac on the St. Lawrence River during a trade dispute, and they took Mathieu Da Costa as well. His abduction strongly suggests just how valuable his skills were, so valuable that rival European powers literally fought over possession of him. In 1608, according to surviving contract records analyzed by the Canadian Encyclopedia, Da Costa signed a 3-year agreement with Dutch interests to act as an interpreter and return to Canada. His annual wage was 60 crowns, a substantial sum that demonstrated his market value. But the French weren't finished with him. By December 1609, Da Costa was imprisoned in Le Havre, France. Whether he was captured by the French or whether he returned to French service and fell into some kind of trouble, the records don't say. After that, Mathieu Da Costa vanishes completely from history. No death record, no further contracts, no grave marker, nothing. A man who spoke 6 languages, who helped found Canada, who was so valuable that empires competed for his services, simply disappears. This silence tells us something important about how history has been recorded. Men like Da Costa were essential to the colonial project. According to historian Ira Berlin's research on Atlantic Creoles, these individuals served as merchants, slave traders, linguists, sailors, artisans, musicians, and military figures who interacted with a wide variety of European and Amerindian groups and helped shape a new Atlantic world system. They made everything possible. And yet, they were rarely celebrated, rarely memorialized, rarely remembered, until now. As historian Jane Landers explains, Atlantic Creoles like Da Costa were cosmopolitan actors who didn't define themselves primarily by race. They moved skillfully between regions controlled by various colonial powers, often acting as interpreters, advisors, and leaders in cultures other than those into which they were born. Da Costa embodied this perfectly. He negotiated between Mikmaq chiefs and French explorers. He translated Dutch contracts and Portuguese trading terms. He was, in many ways, one of the first truly multicultural professionals in North American history. Canada has begun to reclaim his story. In 2017, Canada Post issued a stamp bearing his likeness to mark Black History Month. Streets in Montreal and Quebec City bear his name. A Francophone primary school in Toronto honors him. At Port Royal National Historic Site in Nova Scotia, a plaque commemorates his contribution as part of the Mathieu Da Costa African Heritage Trail. From 1996 to 2011, the Canadian government held the Mathieu Da Costa Challenge, an annual creative writing and artwork contest, encouraging young Canadians to explore their nation's diversity. A man who was almost completely forgotten is now being celebrated as a national hero. But questions remain. Who exactly was Mathieu Da Costa? Where did he come from? Where did he go? What happened to him after 1609? We may never know. The records are fragmentary. Even his name shifts depending on which empire was writing it down. Mathieu Da Costa in English documents, Mathieu de Coste in French records, Matthäus de Coste in Dutch archives. What we do know is that he existed, that he mattered, that without men like him, the European colonization of North America would have looked very different, perhaps impossible. He was the voice that made understanding possible between worlds that had never spoken to each other before. And for 400 years, that voice was silenced by history. Now it speaks again. Drop a comment below and tell me, what do you think happened to Mathieu Da Costa after 1609? Was he executed? Did he escape to live under a new identity? Or is there a death record somewhere, still waiting to be discovered? The mystery remains unsolved, but his legacy is finally being recognized. If this story opened your eyes to a chapter of history you never knew existed, subscribe to African Tales by JONA-LORE, because there are thousands of stories like this, buried, forgotten, waiting to be told, and we're going to tell every single one.